Grace to you and peace from God our Creator and Christ our Redeemer. Please be seated. As one biblical scholar put it, the people gathered in crowds around Jesus as he stood preaching on a hill were not what you would call the beautiful people. They were not wealthy. They were not famous. They were not the movers and shakers. They were not well-fed, and they were not even all that healthy. To quote the author of Matthew just 2 verses before where our reading begins, they were the sick, those who were afflicted with various diseases and pains, demoniacs, epileptics, and paralytics. It was a motley crew that crowded around Jesus as he began preaching what would become the most famous of his public teachings. What's more, the suffering that they experienced was real and powerful and visceral. We tend to soften and spiritualize the people described in the Beatitudes. In our imaginations, those who are poor in spirit are just somewhat glum. Those who hunger for righteousness simply wish for more honesty and integrity from their politicians. And those who mourn are grieving death of a loved one, whether an elderly parent or a spouse or a friend or a child. In short, we imagine them as being remarkably similar to ourselves, their problems and concerns as being the same as our own problems and concerns, the problems and concerns of people who live in a stable and affluent and secure society. To our ears, Jesus' words sound a bit like a chin-up speech, as if he's saying, sure, things seem bad now, but don't worry, God has blessed you. At its best, it can come across as simple platitudes. But the people who crowded around Jesus today were not like us. The world that they lived in was not like our own, and the words that Jesus spoke were beatitudes, not platitudes. As I've mentioned many times before, first century Israel was a land living under the occupation of foreign empire. Leaders who cared little for them and were more concerned with protecting their own wealth and political power ruled over the people. Hunger and disease were everywhere, and even if they somehow had access to our modern medical treatments, the people wouldn't have been able to afford it because there was no social safety net and poverty filled the land. Violence and fear were a daily reality. Those who mourned grieved not the loss of a loved one, but often the loss of entire swaths of a family to the ravages of military occupation and disease and a lack of resources. And though they were Jews living in Israel, their faith was only lightly tolerated by Rome. The religious expression of Jewish identity existed as if on a knife's edge. It was to this reality that Jesus spoke while standing on that hill. He begins by acknowledging the very real brokenness that they have experienced. You who weep, you who have been emptied of hope, you who are unable to withstand the forces of the world around you, you who have been hunted for your faith, and you who hunger and thirst for God to act and bring salvation, Jesus proclaims, "Blessed are you." The full meaning of what Jesus is saying is easy for us to miss because there isn't really an exact translation for the Greek word rendered here as blessed. It has connotations of comfort, but not in the same way that a warm blanket or a hot chocolate are comforting. It's the comfort of one who has been wronged, being able to give testimony to the wrongs. To you who have suffered so much and waited for so long, Jesus says, God has come to you and is with you so that you might give witness to the brokenness of the world. To the reality of their past, Jesus speaks of a new present, a present where God is with us. But he doesn't stop there, because if you're like me, then you'll have spent some time speculating to yourself how the promise in the second half of each of the Beatitudes pairs with the first half. I've been looking at it the wrong way. Jesus isn't trying to make neat little inversions of the wrongs that these people have experienced. He's making broad promises about what the future holds. You who are afflicted, God has come to you and is with you, and that which has caused you suffering will have no place in the creation that God is redeeming. It has no part in the coming kingdom. Here's the interesting part. The Beatitudes isn't just a list of negative things. You who are pure of heart, you who have been full of mercy, you who have been peacemakers in the face of conflict and violence, Jesus continues, God has come to you and is with you. Your work will endure, and it will be a part of the kingdom of God. In the very next verse, after our reading ends today, Jesus goes one more step and gives all those who are crowded around him a name. For you are the salt of the earth. So many of our common phrases that we use in our language come from the Bible. We have all heard of people, or we ourselves, being described as the salt of the earth. It's a term that comes directly from this passage. Today we use it to mean a common everyday person who is good-hearted and unpretentious. And while that would be a good description for the people in the crowds around the hill, it's not how Jesus was using the phrase. Because for most of human history, salt was an incredibly valuable commodity that took a great deal of effort to produce. It was the backbone of trade and could even be used for the payment of wages, hence another phrase, to be worth one's weight in salt. Because it was absolutely vital for human survival. Before salt was used as a mere seasoning or to melt icy roads and sidewalks, it was used primarily as a means of preserving food. When times were plentiful, food could be salted, traded great distances, or kept for future use. And when times were scarce, food that had been preserved with salt preserved families and whole communities from starvation. You are the salt of the earth, Jesus said to the crowds, for you are greatly valued, and you are what preserves God's creation. Think about that. Because that's a pretty radical statement. It's not the occupying armies who have protected the community. It's not the local governors and their great wealth that have safeguarded the world. And it's certainly not an emperor seated in a distant city who has preserved creation. It is these broken and suffering people. It is these people who have found it within themselves to be merciful and pure-hearted and peacemakers. It is these people who have kept the faith, even in the face of persecution, and have longed for God to come to them. It is this blessed community that Jesus names as the salt of the earth. Our world may be a very different one from the one it was in Jesus' time as he stood on that hill in the story. And our experiences, hopefully, are different from those of the people to whom Jesus first spoke these words. Nonetheless, his words still speak to us today, naming the pain and the suffering that we have experienced in our own lives, proclaiming the good news that God has come to us and is with us, and calling us to be the salt of the earth, preserving the whole world through our own acts of mercy and peacemaking and faith. My friends, the reality is that it will not be the politicians who preserve the world. It will not be the rich and the famous who save God's creation. And it will not be the militaries of the world waging war that will keep us safe. I tell you, it will be our own ability to show mercy in our interactions with each other and with strangers. It will be our work to bring peace where there's conflict and discord between family members, between people in our own parish, or whole groups of people in our communities and in the world. And it will be the joy we take in observing and keeping that faith, even when it is inconvenient or unpopular, that we will preserve the world and become a part of the kingdom of God. Together, my friends, we are laying the bricks of that kingdom. You are the salt of the earth, and God is with us.